right, I got a couple friends. Trisha's here. Thomas is here. You guys are like the only people who RSVP to the study groups. How are you doing, Trisha? You're muted by default.
Hi, sorry. How you doing?
I'm doing okay. How are you hanging in there?
I'm hanging. Yeah, still trying to figure out I actually switched to something else from what I was trying to figure out earlier.
Gotcha. For your partials?
Yeah.
Got it. And hey there, Thomas, if you're able to check in over chat or audio, how are you? How's it going? Got it. Okay, overall. How's it going, Josh?
Going great. Finally home.
Yeah, I feel like every time I've met with you in the past forever, you've been in a vehicle.
Yeah. I'm here. I'm now stable.
Got it. And it sounds like you've been a busy bee asking questions about like customizing snippets and things.
Yeah, and I was trying to be more efficient on VS Code, and I realized that the snippets for ERB tags and HTML tags are both available, but only if you do certain things, and it's kind of getting jumbled, and it's really annoying. So I guess I'll figure that out. I asked it on Stack Overflow to see if like the world knew the problem.
Got it. And then it sounds like the cohort's experience with Stack Overflow has been very hit or miss. Got it. We're gonna give it just a minute or two. Hopefully we get more. Otherwise, like, the world is your oyster and you guys can interrupt me and ask questions and we can go from there. Cool. Cool. All right. Cool, we got Cedric here too. I guess I'll go ahead and get started. We have a nice good bunch of people. So what's the goal, right? Well, fasten your seatbelts because this could be a bumpy ride if we're not careful, but we're focusing on authentication in Rails today, specifically using Devise to help with authentication, right? And when we're talking about authentication, we mean how do we ask the user to identify themselves, and then how do we confirm that they are who they said that they are, right? So that's what we're focused on today. In the lessons, you get taught how to do this in a similar fashion compared to mod 2, right? So you'd have something like a current user helper that's going to either return nil if no one is logged in, or return the current user if they are, and you can use that to then see if they're able to do certain actions. That's called authorization. Are they allowed to do the thing that they're trying to do? If you do choose to go that route in your project, if you haven't already started, that's totally fine. Devise is totally not a requirement, but if you are someone who's looking for a stretch, or you feel like this flow that we look at today works for you, you're totally welcome to use Devise, but it's a really common OAuth gem, so I wanted to make sure you guys got some exposure to it. So that is how we're gonna do it today. I'll give you guys a few different resources. This is a blog post that Nancy likes to share. I think Salma was one of her students, but she definitely was a former Flatiron student. Super nice, loves to help. But she has a pretty nice breakdown. Let me stop sharing so I can share things with you. So I'll send that with you, or to you, right? It's a pretty good breakdown. And what I'll also share with you, I think this belongs to Nancy, but not 100% sure. This is a nice little cheat sheet that she gives out for Devise, right? Does it spell out everything you could possibly do with Devise? No. Does it give you kind of enough to be dangerous and get started? Yes, right? But it's not like anything you could possibly do is spelled out there for you. But it's a nice little resource that you guys have. Let me go ahead and reshare. There we go. Okay, cool. So you have those now. I've got an app, well, it doesn't do much yet, but it's kind of up and running already. It's gonna be a simple to-dos app. We probably won't get to the point of adding to-do functionality, but that's okay, because that's not really the point of what we're doing today. We're focused on authorization. What have I done to start, right? Really not too much. I've added pry and the awesome print gem, partly thinking of you, Josh. And I've gotten rid of this gem that kind of complains as we're doing various things. So that's all I've done to start, other than generate kind of the dummy app. The first thing I'm gonna wanna do here, right, is get set up with a user, right? And if we kind of think about the flow for the user, they should never have to type anything into your URL once they navigate to your app. So you're probably going to have some kind of navigation set up, whether it be through buttons or links or a nav bar, something like that. So what I'm going to do to start is I'm going to, in my layouts folder, let me make sure, I have to make sure I put it in the right folder. It does go in my layouts. I'm going to add a partial for my nav bar. Not a folder, but a file, right? So this is going to have my basic navigation. It's going to show up on every page, right? And then here, like, this is going to be pretty simple. Generally, you'd have something like a nav element. Close this up. And then you'd have an unordered list inside that has your various links. So I'll add that to start. I see you popped in, Angel. Hey, Angel. Right. And then each of these is going to be whatever options I want to present to my user, right? Do I want to take them to the home page? Do they want to sign up? Do they want to log in? Do they want to log out? That kind of thing. So I'm going to add a few different LIs here with options for them to start with, right? For my home page, and then just kind of copy paste this over. Cool. So we want to, let me follow my order. Cool. Sign up, log in, and then log out, right? And I'm going to want to show some of these under certain conditions and some of these under others. We'll do that when we get some of the helper methods that we pull from Devise. Otherwise, if you were doing this kind of on your own vanilla style, you'd have your own like logged in helper that you would use if you needed it. And as we're going through this, working with Devise, it's kind of like any other tool that does a bunch for you. If you have typos, you'll get errors that are hard to fix. So if any of you see that I do have typos, please yell at me. All right. Now for my next step, I'm going to render this partial. So in my main layout page, so that's application here, I'm going to go ahead and render that partial I built. Say render layouts. We're calling that nav. That all looks good to start. That's all I need for right now. And then this isn't something you have to do because it's only going to have one view, but I'm going to have in my application controller, like the action that handles my home view. So I'm choosing inside of this view folder to make a folder called application that's going to handle the views for that controller, but in this case it's just going to be one, right? You've got that folder, and inside of it, right, you could typically call this something like home or welcome. It doesn't matter so much, it just has to parallel the name of the action. I'm going to call it welcome, and then before I forget myself, I'm going to add that action in here. Doesn't really have to do anything except exist, right? And that's kind of what I have to start, right? What else do I need if we think about our request response flow? I've got an action, I've got a view. What am I missing? What tells the user what happens when they go to localhost/? They're going to ask you questions like this in your assessment, right? When I do Sinatra assessments, this is one of the first things I ask. The user goes to localhost, in that case 9393/, and then how does your application know where to take the user?
Are you talking about the root route?
Yeah, I have to define a route, right? In this case, it's going to be a root route. Thanks, Trisha. So I'm going to head over into my config folder, and then the struggle to find this file. Right? There's a couple different ways you can define a root route. I'm going to use this syntax, root2, and then that's going to be my application controller, right? And specifically that welcome action. Cool. And that all looks good. We're calling it welcome. Everything there matches up. Cool. And then if I wanted to test that out before I did anything else, let's go ahead and give that a shot. Localhost. Getting ahead of myself. Come on. Cool. It's complaining about something. Ah, missing the N in nav. It doesn't know what I meant. back to my, there we go. Good thing I checked that to start. Cool, right? So it doesn't do anything interesting. It's got kind of my stubbed out nav links, but it works, right? Now that we've got kind of that basic setup going, we're gonna start with devise. We're gonna add a few different gems today, but for right now, we're just adding devise. Right? If you wanted to read up more, like I'll send you guys a ton of links. But again, this is a really commonly used gem for authentication in Ruby. Some other ones I know, I think can is pretty popular. I'm sure there are a ton of others, but this is one that's really, really common. So I have that added to my, not yet, I haven't added it. I'm gonna add it now. Then we're going to bundle, right? And now the next thing we're gonna have to do is kind of set up some configuration settings. Anything that you've got going on in that config folder, right? Particularly here, we're gonna look at initializers, right? It's basically setting some configuration for you. So if you're working with devise, what you would have to do, right, is do Rails G devise install, right? In some respects, working with devise is kind of like a recipe. You're following their steps so you get their functionality, just like anything else. But in this case, it's going to make us a file called devise in that initializers folder, right? And it even gives you helpful instructions on how to use it. But essentially, it just gives you some options that you can toy with depending on what it is you're trying to do. So you can do things related to mailers if you want to. You can, right? So here it's case insensitive when it checks for emails, it looks like. You can strip white space, it looks like. There's one in particular that I want to change here, right? I wouldn't do this when I would I'm going to do this now for ease of testing and to show you that we can, but here it's kind of giving you limits on your password length. And I can change this if I want to. I'm going to say that my password can be 3 to 128 characters, right? Because I can customize that. It's a configuration, right? So those are some of the things that you can do, right? And what else do they give you here to start? Generally, you don't have to check this step to make sure that that configuration is set right. I know it is for my application. They want you to make sure you have a root URL. We have that set already. If we want to use their flash messages, right, we're going to go ahead and add these Ps to our application file. So I'm going to do that now while it's on my mind. Right, where do I want that? Makes sense to put it under the nav bar. So I'll add that here so I can use their flash messages. And then one thing that we'll see here is that there's a lot that you have access to from devise out of the box. But if you want any kind of customization, you kind of have to generate it yourself first on your local machine and then tweak what it is that you want, right? So I don't think we're going to do this step yet, but this would let us copy devise's views. So then we can tweak them for whatever our use case was. Cool, cool, cool. Now, what do I want to do next? So ultimately, one thing I'm going to customize is one of the attributes on my user, right? By default, devise gives you, like you have the email field, you have password and password confirmation. You don't get username by default. That's something I'm going to add. So that's something I'm going to customize. So what am I going to do first? Right. Another thing worth pointing out is devise uses bcrypt automatically. So it uses that to store your password securely. It's not an additional thing that you'd have to add in if you're using devise. I'm going to go ahead and generate my user model. That's what I want to start with first. So if I do Rails G devise user, it's going to build a ton of stuff for me. Okay. So what did it do? It got me a migration file. I get a user model. I get some test stuff. And then I get some routes that are built for me out of the box. So let's take a look at those. Right. I get, right. So I get a ton of functionality out of the box. I get an encrypted password. I get email. And I remember there being more, but I guess there's some stuff that you can tweak later on. So I have that to start. I think I also wanted to show you some of the routes next before we get into the next step. So if we wanted to look and see kind of like the routes that were built for us, we can do Rails routes, and I think it's grep user, right? And again, there's not one right way to do it. It's just kind of, this is a tool that you have that's going to build a ton of stuff for you. So with me doing minimal work, what do I get? I get a new user session helper, right? That takes me to a route that would let me sign in a user, right? And handle that sign in, right? I can log a user out, right? I haven't toyed with this myself, but it looks like you can make new passwords, edit passwords. So there's probably something like forgotten password, and you can get that going as well. And again, other stuff here, if you want to, maybe this is for like deleting an account, I'm not sure, but you get a ton of stuff out of the box. Now, and again, if we look at that cheat sheet, it's kind of like it's giving you some of the more commonly used ones that someone beginning with this might want to use. You get some helper methods that normally you would define yourself, right? You get a current user helper that you could use. You get a user signed in that would be analogous to, like I think in Sinatra, you guys normally see it as a login question mark method, right? Same idea, right? Because in many applications, you're going to need something like this. It returns true or false if they're signed in, or if you just need the current user, you have a method built for you already that does that, right? You can see the path to have the user sign up. You can see the path to log in a user, right? And log out, like we said, right? So not new concepts, you're just getting it out of the box. Right. Any questions so far? No, we're chilling. Cool. So then now that I have my model set up, I'm going to go ahead and start customizing some of my views, right? So again, if you want to see devise views so you can customize them, you kind of have to run this command to build them yourself on your machine. They're already there, but we want to customize them. So we're going to run Rails G devise views, right? And again, it's going to build a ton of stuff for us. If I head over, wandering here. So did that not actually? Rails G devise views. I would have expected that to, oh, maybe it's because I didn't migrate. I have my migration for users, but I didn't migrate. So I'm hoping that that's what did it, because I forgot the easy step. Cool, so now I have users to work with. So then if I try and generate my views again, devise for views. Views is recognized as a plural.
Maybe Rails G devise colon views.
Oh, derp, thank you. Right. There we go. Now we have all of the things. I should have looked at my cheat sheet when in doubt, because it is exactly there. Thanks, Josh. Okay, I thought I had broken something. We might have been on a wild ride. But again, what we have here, right? So now we've got this lovely devise folder that has a ton of stuff that you could potentially use. We're specifically going to be working with, I think we're actually only going to tweak registrations ourselves, but you get like a login form, right? It's got all of this kind of structure for you already to tweak as you like. Same thing for signing up. Maybe you want to edit a user account. Maybe you want to do stuff with passwords or mailers if you really want to go above and beyond, right? But this is kind of what we're starting with, right? Now here, What do I want to do next? Views or models? We have our structure to start with. We checked our routes. We generated our views. We have a server running, but we've changed some things, so might as well kill that and restart. See your question, so I'm going to check that. Got it. Hey, Sandy. Cool, we have that running. And then now another thing that I'm going to want to do, I mentioned this before. So now that I've got a user, I can make use of these helpers. I want to show different links in my nav conditionally. So what I'm gonna do is say something like, if the user isn't logged in, show them sign up and log in. If they are logged in, show them the other stuff. So that itself is gonna look pretty simple. We're just making use of the Rails helper here. So in this case, what is the helper? It's called user signed in. So I'm gonna say the opposite of that. If user is not signed in, they're not signed in, go ahead and show them this stuff. Otherwise, I gotta watch my ERB tags here. Else, show them the login, and I'll probably do something like display their username just to double check that everything went okay. But I think this is good for right now. If, there we go, cool. And then if I run that again, it's complaining because I didn't run in this environment, which doesn't seem right. Duplicate, column name, email. Oh, add device to use.
Is that when you did the previous thing? You might have to.
So do I, let us see. We learn the most when things go wrong, right? So these are the same. Yeah. Got it. So then this may make it better or it may make it worse. We'll find out. Cool. So now that's gone. If I kill this, all right, so it's not running either one. And then we head back here. Okay, cool. That makes me feel a little bit better. I'm not logged in. I can see home, sign up, and log in. That makes sense to me. Cool. So then that we have, we're using our helper. We have ourselves conditionally rendering those nav links. I'm going to make use again of some of those routing helpers that Devise builds for us, right? So that my nav links actually do something. So what I'm going to do, right? So I'm actually going to link to like home here. So I'm going to say display home, right? Because first argument to link to is what I want to see, right? And then here we're calling home, that's our root URL, right? So if we think about how our routes are structured, right? We should have a route path. Yeah, right? So we get a little route path helper. So then we're going to link to that. I'll copy paste this over so you guys aren't watching me do this all day. But we're gonna have sign up. And then what does Devise call this? They call this new user registration path, I believe. New user registration path. Cool. So then user registration path. Same idea here, but I want to see login. Anyone remember what this one is called?
New user session path?
Yeah, new. So again, they have names that like are descriptive of what they are. So it's a new user session path, right? And then this one should have called it log out. Log out, and this, I want to say it's called destroy user session path. Destroy user session. All right, cool. That seems okay to me. If I refresh, is it angry? It is. Syntax error. So if else end, what does it tell me? It's complaining in particular about that line. At home, ERB, what I want to see, where I want to go. Oh, so one thing I know is definitely wrong that may or may not be the issue, but so by default, what kind of request does a link to make when you click on it?
Get.
Yeah, so one thing here, because I'm calling this destroy, right? That's not going to be a get request. It's going to be a delete request. So I definitely have to specify that myself. I don't think that's going to fix our syntax error, but one can pray. Oh no, come back. Cool. Nah, so what did I do? I've got a UL. Home root path, that looks good. User signed in, they are signed in. Ah, this guy. Or that at least would be one problem among potentially multiple. But let's get us going. Right, so right kind of tag called home. We have a root path. Check. Nav. Rendering template. Okay, delete. We're closing this. This is closed. We've got an LI. Those are both closed. This, yeah.
Yeah.
I'll probably copy that over. Thank you. I appreciate you. Cool. What the hey? Root path. I think you have nav is where you defined the root. I think you have AV instead on nav where you define the root path. Don't. All right. We've got this closed. Link to. So I don't know. I mean, I'm assuming that you were correcting me gracefully, but if I'm calling this method, it would probably help to actually call this link to method. So the issue is that, as I often do, I got ahead of myself. So like I had an argument, but no method call. So Ruby's like, I don't know what you're doing. So I'm trying to refer to my link to helper, right? Which then takes the argument of what I want displayed and then where I want to go when the link is clicked. So that is what I'm missing. Cool, right? So cool.
It was just reading like a string before.
Yeah, I mean, we can sort of poke around and see like why it gives that particular error. But that's what it was. I was calling or not calling a method and just having a bunch of like strings and method calls that Ruby was supposed to figure out what to do with. But Rails is not that magical, Thomas. I wish it was. Okay, so now we've got a nav bar that actually does some things already, but I don't want to show you yet. I want to build one of my own custom controllers. So I think what I'm going to do first is I'm going to add another column on my user model, right? Because I want the user to also have a username. So did I want to do this in a particular way? Nah. Right? So I'll kill this for a second and I'm going to run Rails G migration, add username to users. No typos there. And then it's just a username that's going to default to a string, so I don't need anything else. And I don't need any tests. Right. So that looks good. I'm going to go ahead and migrate that before I forget myself. And then make sure my schema is updating the right way. Cool. So that seems okay, but always check to be safe. Trust no one. Okay, and my user has a username now, so that looks good. Okay, controller stuff, right? You have some controllers you have access to out of the box with Rails, but if you want to customize anything, you got to write it. You have to like make them yourself and then tweak the things that you want. So what generally you're going to want is a registrations controller. So I'm going to build out my own controller, Rails G registrations, right? That's the name of my controller, the prefix, right? And then I don't, Rails G controller is the kind of generator it is. Right, Rails G controller, name of my controller, and then I don't need any tests. Cool. Right, so I've got my controller and some things related to that. I'm gonna hop right on over to that controller that I built. Right. Now, anyone know what I need to do in this controller because I added an attribute to my user? I wouldn't expect you to know, but looking for audience something if anyone does. Right.
Like a relationship?
Not inside of my controller, right? But if I want a user to fill out a form where they're putting their username, their password, and their email, and Devise doesn't know to expect a username. If I want to do any kind of mass assignment in Rails, what do I need to do in my controllers?
Help.
I
almost said helper method, but I don't think that's right.
Well, you're on the right track. We need to whitelist that param, right? Because default Devise isn't like expecting it by default. Now, if you do this wrong, you will spin your wheels for a long time and be confused, like I did when I did this yesterday. So you have to be very particular. So again, you have that cheat sheet and watch how I'm doing it too. But basically what you're going to do is you're going to build your little private method. And here there's two methods that you're going to work with for Devise. There's one for sign up and there's one for if you want the user to be able to update their account. So we're going to define a method called def sign up params. Right. So the thing that I did wrong when I did this the first time is I had it as sign up and I couldn't figure out why my user had no username no matter what I did. So it's got to be sign underscore up underscore params, right? And that's in the cheat sheet too, right? So it's got to match exactly, right? Because we're basically overriding like the default Devise behavior, right? Now here, this is going to look pretty typical. I'm going to require params.require. Everything is going to be scoped under user. That's pretty typical. And then I'm going to permit everything that I had already plus the new username. So there's going to be a username, email, password, and then password confirmation because we're going to have that field as well. Confirmation. That looks good. No typos. I was watching Nancy's study group and she's always like, if we have a typo, we'll die. Like terrible things will happen. But this looks okay so far. And then we're basically going to copy paste this over because it's otherwise identical. But there's another method called account update params. That looks good. I think I'm cool there. So now I'm whitelisting that param. We'll see when I try to sign up. Yep.
Update. I think
Thank you. Thank you. $1 million. 10 points to Gryffindor. So now I've got my controller set up. Now, the next thing I have to do is I need to make Devise aware of this controller. Like it needs to, one, inherit all of the functionality from Devise. So I'm going to get rid of this piece here and actually inherit from, I guess module is a better word, from a module in Devise. So what we're going to do here, and this has to match 100%, is we're going to inherit from Devise registrations controller, right? That looks good. That matches exactly. So that's the first thing I'm going to have to do. And then what I'll also have to do is go into my routes, right? And then I'm going to, like, I think these got built for me by default by Devise, but I want to customize this guy. So I'm going to start a block here. Devise for users do. I guess I didn't need a block for that, right? I'm going to add just some options here. So I'm going to add a flag for controllers and then tell it that there is this controller for registrations. And then I give it the name of my controller, right? The prefix on my controller is registrations, right? We're gonna add a second controller here too, but any controller you have that's inheriting from Devise, you have to like add it in here. The biggest thing I see with students who've already started their projects with Devise is they look at this cheat sheet and they know that the registrations one has to be here because it's in the cheat sheet, but you'll see that we add one for callbacks and that'll need to be added too. But for right now, we've got this one and Devise is aware of it. That looks good so far. Now, I whitelisted my new params, registered my controller, connected it to my routes. Now I'm just gonna go ahead and tweak this registration view, right? So remember in Devise, in my views folder, right, I have all these folders built for me. Right now I care about signing up the user. So I'm gonna go into new and in theory in edit 2. And then I want a username field. So I'm gonna copy this over here. Okay. And I just have to tweak it a little bit. It's gonna be for user instead of email. That looks good. Now the one thing is that like email field, that's an actual helper method that we have access to that's going to handle some things related to formatting rather, because like it'll yell at me if I don't have an @ in the email, for example. There is no helper for username field. This isn't a thing. Ruby will yell at you. So we're just gonna use kind of a vanilla text field here. That looks good.
How did you do that thing where you just highlighted username or email, and then changed them all at the same time?
Magic. It's one thing that I learned from Avi. So on Mac, you like if I highlight it and I do Command D, it'll find like the next, like if I just click that again and again. Is that what you meant?
Yep.
Yes, it's one of the few little cool things I can do keyboard shortcut wise. So I've got a username, autofocus is here. I don't want it on the email anymore, so I'm gonna take that out.
Field.
What's up, Sandy?
This text field.
Yeah, I was very excited for that text field. Thanks, Sandy. Okay, cool. So then now I think I can actually start looking at this thing and filling it out. So helps to start a server. Give it a second to do its thing. Dramatic pause. So now, with very little work on my part, several typos, but generally very little work, right? I get a syntax error. It's probably something I did to myself. And here, I lost this comma when I took out the autofocus. Cool, right? So again, we learned sometimes the hard way that you have to check in the browser as you're going along, right? But again, with minimal effort on my part, I get this form that kind of does a ton for me out of the box already. It knows that the minimum is 3 characters, because remember I changed that in the configuration file. It's got a password confirmation. And let's see, I've clearly been testing this a lot. I'm going to volunteer you as tribute, Josh, so that I have a name to use for this. So my favorite pattern is just name@email.com, right? It will accept that. The only thing it will yell at me about is if I try to move forward, right, without that @sign. So if I just try to put in from here, right, I get a nice little pop-up that's built for me because I use that email field. And I also, let's say I did follow the rules there, but then I didn't put in a password, I should get nice little flash messages. Or actually, this is the field with errors. So already it's doing some things you'd need from your, or like in your project. You're getting, how do we pull this up? You've got your form, you're getting fields with errors if I know where exactly to look. Yeah, right. So it's building you field with errors right out of the box, and you're getting above there. Oh yeah, the error explanation, right? So it's got that kind of standardized for you already. But if I follow the rules, it's just Josh password. Password. Well, I imagine it should. Oh, brilliant. Josh password. Cool, right? So we've got a simple login, right? Right? Get a nice little flash message as well, right? So it's at least working, right? So for the most part, I've got my device stuff out of the way so far, and I'm going to start talking about third-party authentication, right? So we're going to do it with GitHub. If you are using Devise, I recommend going with GitHub, or even if you're not using Devise, GitHub is pretty easy to get started with. Facebook is not so bad. Since they've updated those lessons, they do match up with the GitHub interface pretty well. So those are the two that I would recommend. I would not recommend Google. Do so at your own risk, but we're going to use GitHub today, right? Now, this part is actually pretty easy. Are there questions about anything I've done so far? Now we're on to the good stuff. Okay, cool. So I need a plethora of gems here in my gem file. So I'm going to pop on over. So generally, if you are using OmniAuth, which I recommend that you do, you're going to need the OmniAuth gem, OmniAuth, and then you're going to need like the provider specific OmniAuth gem. So because I'm going to use GitHub for my third-party login, I'm going to add the OmniAuth GitHub gem. And then I'm going to do this just while we're here, because I guess let me phrase this as a question, right? So what does GitHub need to know like about my application so that it can it knows that it's getting requests for my application? It needs some information about my app. Some of you had to work with this in your Mod 1 project. What are my app credentials? Phrasing the question poorly. What we're going to need is we're going to need an app ID and an app secret, right? And some of you, we worked on this in your Mod 1 project, but those credentials you should never push up on GitHub. So what we're going to do so that we're storing our credentials securely is we're going to add another gem here called .env Rails. Some of you use the .env gem itself in previous projects. So here it's .env Rails. I think I have this pulled up somewhere. Maybe I'll come back. I got a ton of stuff open, but it's going to help us basically have access to our environment variables in a secure way. And then we're going to hide those from GitHub. So we're going to add these keys while we're here. We're going to go ahead and bundle, right? And then before I forget, I don't know if there's a graceful way of doing this in VS Code. I haven't found it, like to add something at the root of your project. I always do it in the terminal, but I'm going to add a file called .env that's actually going to house my app ID and my app secret. So the most important thing is to make sure that this is in the root directory of your project. If it's not, you're going to find that you're getting your variables from that file as nil. So I always confirm that it's at the root of my project, which it is. And then what I'm going to do, right, I have this git ignore file. Anything I specify here is going to be ignored by Git. So I'm going to do this right away, so I'm never in danger of pushing this to GitHub. Once you have pushed it to GitHub, like there's not really a way of like undoing that, because it's really easy on GitHub to look at previous commits and still getting that secret. So right off the bat, I'm going to go ahead and add that file here so that I'm hiding it. Okay. So then we can do the fun stuff. So I'm going to head over somewhere in here. I thought it had it open. Guess not. But I'm going to go to my GitHub, right? Do not laugh at my profile picture. It's been the same one for a long time. But when you are logged into your profile, right, if you go to your little user avatar situation here, if you go down to settings, right, and then you're going to go to the left-hand side here, you're going to scroll all the way down to developer settings, right? You're going to go to OAuth apps here, right? I have a few different apps from testing things out and from helping students, but we are going to go over to the top right here, and we're going to make a new OAuth app, right? It doesn't really matter what I call my application, right? You could call it the same thing as your repo for the project, or in our case, we're just gonna call it the same as our actual folder here, right? So that's our to-dos app, right? Now, this homepage URL is just the full URL to my application, right? For right now, as you guys are kind of working on your projects, it's gonna be localhost, right? If you were to use Facebook for third-party login, Facebook does not allow you to use HTTP. It must be HTTPS. So that's one thing that can make login with Facebook a pain. Another thing is that because Rails S by default uses HTTP for localhost, you can't use Rails S. You have to use Thin if you're going to like get this working with Facebook and third-party login. So just an FYI for those of you who might have been thinking about using Facebook. Right. So now I've got my home page. This is optional, right? Now this callback URL is where GitHub is going to send my user after they've authorized them and everything has gone according to plan, right? So it generally is going to follow the same pattern where you've got your local host and then users, auth, whatever your provider is, and then callback, right? So this is where we're sending them back to, right? I think all of that looks good. So I can go ahead and register my application, right? I've got 0 users because it was just born, and I've got this client ID and client secret so that GitHub knows my application from other applications that are doing whatever with their data, right? Now, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna move this over to that env file, right? As far as I'm aware, it's like arbitrary what we call these keys, but generally you'd call them something like provider key and then provider secret, something descriptive of what they are. So the convention would be to use constants here. We're gonna call this GitHub key, and we're gonna set that equal to, not all of that, but just the ID. Cool, right? Let me double check that I didn't screw that up. So it starts with 2. Cool. This doesn't have to be a string. You don't have to add quotes here. And then the second one, right, will be GitHub secret, right? Or Facebook key, Facebook secret, or Google key, Google secret, right? Whatever your provider is. And then we're just going to pull over my data. Good. Good. I think I just copied up a bunch of extra stuff.
For Google, is it HTTPS or HTTPS?
I don't believe so. The thing that's tricky with Google is that, well, one, they've changed a bunch of things recently. So if you look at a bunch of blog posts, like they're probably going to be outdated because Google keeps changing things. And I think Facebook has been pretty good, but I know in the past they kind of would like change some of their rules as well. But the thing with Google is that you have to be an authorized domain. So it can be a pain to get working with localhost out of the box. It seems possible. I was kind of toying with it with Heather, but it's harder to get started. Let's put it that way. Okay, cool. So we've got my stuff here. Now we're adding that, and then we're all good, right? So what's our next step? We've got this configured, and then we're gonna head back over into that configuration file, the one that's hiding an initializer. So this devise one here, right? It's easy to kind of get lost in what's here, but if you do a little search, I want to say it's OmniAuth. Yes, this line here, right? We're going to comment this back in, right? And then we're just going to, like, not literally, but we're going to enable our key and secret, if you want to think of it that way. So what we're going to do is we're going to access these global variables, right? Because essentially that's what that .env Rails gem is doing, right? It's allowing me to access environmental variables and expose them this way. So I'm going to access that constant and then use the key that I specified in that file. So I called it GitHub key. GitHub key. And then my secret was GitHub secret. Right? GitHub. Gotcha. Have a good day, Trisha. Secret. So that looks good. GitHub key, GitHub secret. I haven't really seen a case where you have to change this. You can, but we're going to leave this the way that it is. Right? And I think that's enough for us to be, nope, not enough for us to be dangerous, because we have a callback, right? Which we said is where the GitHub is going to send our user when they come back from being authorized. So now we have to prepare to take that callback. So this is where I was talking about building that second controller. We added our own for registrations. Now we're going to add a callbacks controller. I think I'm just going to do that manually here. Not there though. Yeah, in controllers, right? So we're going to call this callbacks controller. That all looks good, right? Class callbacks controller. And this is going to handle the response from GitHub, right? Now, this also has to inherit from devise, but it's going to be another class, right? That's outlined in the cheat sheet. Actually, in this one, it's not. I'll have to have like an annotated cheat sheet that I share with you guys. But this is going to inherit specifically from devise omni auth, that's spelled right, callbacks controller, right? That looks good. We're going to end this here, right? And then convention is to call this like the name of your provider. So we're going to call this method GitHub, right? And then we're going to pop a binding.pry in here for good measure. That all looks okay so far, right? Now, ultimately what I'm going to do is I'm going to build a class method on my user model that's going to handle the response from GitHub, right? So I'm referring to a method that doesn't exist yet, but we're going to build that in a sec. But I'm going to do something like call this class method, which is from omniauth, right? The name of this method is arbitrary, but it's just descriptive of what it's doing. It's making a user from omniauth data. So we're going to call that from omniauth. And then what it's going to take in specifically, right, is some information from rack, if you think of it that way, right? So we can refer to request.env. I think there's some links that I have for you about what actually this is referring to, right? So basically, Rails applications are based on rack, just like Sinatra. And request.env is a way to access information about the request that was made in a nutshell, right? So we're accessing that object, and it's going to have keys, or a key of omniauth.auth, and that's all got to be spelled right. So we're accessing that object, and it's going to have this particular key, right? We'll build this method in a second, right? And then there's another helper that you have access to from devise. It's not in this cheat sheet, but I'll share with you guys. There's like a bunch of other helpers that you can use. So I think we're using this guy. We're going to use sign in and redirect, right? That's a helper method that we have. So we're going to call it here, sign in and redirect. And it's going to take us to the user path, right? So here we're going to access that by giving the user model, right? So that's our next step here. And then now for this user that we're going to create, right? Basically, GitHub needs a way of knowing if this user has authenticated with them before, right? Because you wouldn't want to make a bunch of duplicate users from GitHub. So what we're also going to need to do is we're going to add another attribute on our user for UID. That's a common convention that's used for the user ID. So we're going to add another migration here to add that column, okay? So we're going to say Rails G migration, add, nope, not that way, add omni auth to users, that looks good, no typos. And then it's gonna take actually 2 arguments. So we're gonna specify the provider, so like who is the one authenticating. In this case, it's gonna be GitHub, but it could be Facebook, it could be Twitter. So we're gonna give it an attribute of provider, right? That's gonna be a string. And then UID, which is also going to be a string, right? So we're gonna generate that migration, right? And then we're gonna go ahead and run that while we're here. Cool. Now, this is kind of cool. If we go into our user model, we're swimming in things here, right? So there are a bunch of modules that we can use with Devise and some that aren't like enabled by default, like they're available, but they're commented out here. And we're gonna add in omni-authable, which is what it sounds like. It's adding functionality for us to use omni-auth with Devise, right? I'll also share with you, I got this up here somewhere. It's just like a bunch of different modules and kind of what they do. They do generally have descriptive names, so it's not that hard to infer. I think it's here. Yeah, so these are the various modules, right? They don't actually have like the omni-authable ones here. I think these are the ones that are by default commented in, but they do have descriptions of what each of those are, right? So we're gonna go ahead and add this guy in here so that we're enabling omni-auth. That all looks good.
Sorry, I think I got a little lost. At the end of the other page, you were saying we needed to add a redirect. Could you just explain that last line?
Right, so what do we, like, this is going to make our new user, right? And then we have a helper method, right, called sign in and redirect from Devise that's going to take them to like their user homepage. Now I think, I don't usually use this syntax. I'm guessing there must be something like a user path. So if I were to Rails info routes, if I run my app, again, cool. So there must be something like user, it's not user session path. Where is it actually taking us by default? User, sign in, view session path, view, edit, view password, view user, sign in, view user. I'm not actually sure where it's taking us by default. I'll see if I can find a better example, right? But this is a common convention, right? Where if you're taking them to like a show path for a resource, you could say something like user path and then give the object, but here we're just giving the object directly, and Rails knows to grab the ID from that user so it knows where to redirect to, right? So that's the way that we have this set up. Now, we enabled the omni-authable, that looks good, and now we're gonna head back over to, it should be in our user model. Where are we at here? Oh, this is the model that I wish I, or the method that I wish I had, right? Because in our callbacks controller, we're calling this user from omni-auth. We have to actually build that. That's not something that's coming from Devise. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna build this here, right? So this is just a class method. So we're prepending it with self, and then we're calling it from omni-auth, right? And basically what this is gonna do is it's gonna take a hash of data from GitHub and use it to either find the user with those credentials if they've logged in with GitHub before here, or make them if they haven't, right? So this can vary a little bit depending on your model and which provider you're using. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna say, we're gonna use a where query, which we're getting from Active Record. And we're gonna say, find the user whose provider is the one that's in this hash that we're getting from GitHub. I forgot to add that, right? So we're gonna get a hash that we're calling here auth, but it's a bunch of data that we're getting back from GitHub, right? So inside of that hash, which we'll look at in a second, there should be a key of provider, right? So we're finding them by provider and then that UID that we set on them, right? So find the user who has a provider of GitHub and who has a UID that has been defined on that object, right? But it should match the one that's in this hash auth ID, right? And then we're gonna call a method called first or create. This is just kind of an out of the box active record method, right? So this is, I think, one of the easier things to understand. Where are we, right? So it's just a method called first or create, right? Return the first thing that matches this query or make an object with this data, right? So it's kind of like a find or create. So we're finding that user. And then like you guys saw in mod 2, we can pass a block to this model method, right? So this is going to be a user that we're finding or making, right? And then we're just going to set some attributes for that hash. It'll make a lot more sense when we actually see the hash that we're getting back. But here we're just setting some values. So we're going to say on that user object, set their provider from that auth hash. So it's going to be auth.provider, right? We're also going to set all of the typical things. So the username, the UID, and the email. So we're going to say user.username, and we're going to get that from the hash auth.info.name. That looks good. And the UID, that's going to be user.uid is auth.id. User.email is auth.info.email. Now, the one thing here that we're going to need to do so that we are storing this, like, I guess let me take a step back. Right? What is the benefit of third-party login? Or like, what are some of the benefits of third-party login? Why do we do that?
So they can do all of it for you, like if there's a like security or
yeah, so there's a video that they share with you guys somewhere in mod 2 when you start learning about bcrypt. It's like a nice British gentleman who's talking about like the levels of password security, right? Worst thing you could do is have like plain string passwords in your database, right? And the second best thing you can do is what we learned how to do in mod 2. You've got hashed and salted passwords. The very best thing you can do is have somebody else deal with your passwords, right? So now we're saying GitHub, you can deal with like storing the passwords securely. Like that's your bad now. You're gonna handle that, right? But I still need to store something for this attribute in my database. So one way that we can do this, Devise gives us a method called friendly token. It's just gonna give us like an innocuous string that we can store for this user in our database, right? So we're gonna do user.password is devise.friendly token.
that's different from authenticity token.
Yes, as far as I'm aware. And then I think by default it takes an argument of 20, but we're just gonna pass it an argument of 20. So that looks good. And then I think if you weren't using Devise, so let me just show you how I did this when I was doing my project. Where are we at? So this is my user, right? So we just need a dummy password, right? Devise is just giving us a way to generate one, but this is another way that you could generate a dummy password, right? We just need something to put for that attribute. So here that looks good, I think. And then what is our next step? We have to register this controller. This is the biggest thing I see in students that like I'm helping who've already started their projects. They forget to take that callbacks controller and register it. So we're gonna go ahead and do that now. We're gonna head over to our routes, right? And we're just gonna add another controller, right? In this case here, come on. There we go. So the key for this I know matters. We have to call this omni-auth callbacks, right? And then that key is going to point to the name of our controller. So we're calling that callbacks, right? That looks good here. And now I think if we've done everything right, we should be able to get this working. So this is where we pray and we hope for the magic to work. Do I want to put a binding anywhere else? I think I like it where I have it. So let's see. Just to be safe, because I've changed a few different things, we'll start this up again. And I think I'm currently logged into GitHub. I'll show you both flows. I am logged in currently. We're gonna go to sign up, right? So I get this button, I think because I commented in that module, that Omni Alphable. But now I'm gonna try to sign in with GitHub, right? That looks good so far, that's promising. It's trying to authorize me, right? It's saying like, it wants to access my account, all of my info, right? I have some extra stuff too, because I'm an employee here, but I'm gonna click, it's trying to authorize me. It's a good thing I changed my password recently, so I actually know what it is. Or do I know what it is? Okay, it's trying. So this is good, I'm in my Pri, right? So now I'm here, right? So then let me sort of show you a little bit here. I should have put that binding in that other action, right? First, let me show you that I'm getting this user back, right? I've got this nice user here that I made, right? User ID of 2, it knows my email, it knows when I was created, it's got my username that it's getting back from GitHub and my provider, and I don't have a UID. Do I, user from Omnia, I would expect to have a UID. So what do I want to see? UID is auth ID, first or create. Let me poke around some more. Let's try that again. Right. So it's kind of working. It looks like I'm logged in. One thing, I thought I did this, but maybe I didn't. If I can't hear you.
Sorry, you have to save a UID into your.
Yeah, but I have that here. I want to. Now I lost track of what I was doing. I want it to look in where I have my nav bar. So because I'm not seeing something that I would have expected to. Oh wait, it's in my navda. So it's in my, come on. Okay, so I didn't do this here. This was something I meant to do anyway, but we're just gonna add something that says like the username so we get confirmation that we're actually doing something with that attribute, right? With devise, one of the helpers that we get is that current user helper. So I'm gonna do something like current user.username. User.user. That looks good. And then I'm gonna log out and try that again. So we log out, try to initiate it again, sign in with GitHub. Right. Now it's hanging like I'm still in Pri. Oh, there we go. Cool. So this is where we were before. Now it made that user. So now I'm in this other method. So a couple things I want to show you here, right? If we look at this auth hash, right, there's a ton of stuff about me, right? It knows my provider, right, who I'm logging in with. I do have a UID here. So that's confirmation that I'm at least getting that back, right? I've got my username, email. There's a bunch of stuff that I could poke with here. And again, this is coming from this request.env object. Can I not access it here? Maybe I have to be in that other method. We'll poke around in a second. But like this is that data that I'm then using to set attributes on the user. What I don't understand is what else is going. So if I, okay, it's getting my username. So maybe everything is fine and I just confused myself based on where I was, right? But I'm logged in, it knows who I am, right? I can log out and sign up again, right? It's hanging there in that Pri. I guess it's because maybe because I've been playing around with this so much today, right? I ended up here, right? It made the user, so it has me here. it's not setting this UID. User.uid. Well, I'm not inside the, no, I have access. Auth ID. Auth for, oh, I'm not in that context anymore. I'm in the callbacks controller. So now I'm here. I think I'm just overthinking it. It looks like it was set properly. Now, if I take out these prize for right now, I want to show you what the workflow looks like if I weren't logged in. So I'll take that out here, and I think I had the other one that was in my model. That's here, right? So say I went over to, oops, GitHub, and I log myself out. I guess for me, it's going to be some additional steps, but that's all right. But if I log out here, right, I can initiate the process again, sign in with GitHub, right? It actually is auto-populating my stuff. I can sign in. I have two-factor OAuth because I'm an employee here. 114, 90. That looks good. And that seems to be still working. So that looks okay. Are there any questions about what I've covered so far? Because I might have muddied some of the waters there. Anything that I can clear up? It is working now. I guess the one thing that I really wanted to show you guys, but I'm turning myself around a little bit. I wanted to show you this guy. There we go. Right. So I can log out and head back in. Cool. So now we're here. I wanted to show you this object. Right? There's a lot going on in here. I don't know what most of this does, but basically, like, the environment variable is storing, like, I think that it's like global on your machine. It's just a bunch of data that you can use for particular purposes. I think it's like 96 keys, right? Or 96 keys dot length, right? So it's got a ton of information there. What we're specifically looking at is the key with the OmniAuth stuff. So I think we called that, I think it was OmniAuth.auth. Cool, right? And again, that's just the response from GitHub, which I'm using at a high level to see if that user has been made before via GitHub or make them for the first time, right? But I'm using this UID to keep track of that user, right? Cool. That looks good so far. And there's other things that we can do as far as customization. There are a lot of methods that come with Devise that you can also use. So another one, is it here? We're not going to do this here. I'll just kind of show you some of the places you can look to get started. I think it's called, is it here? Authenticate. I'll have to find it. There's a method you get called Authenticate User, and then you can use that as a filter on some of your other routes. But I'll see if I can pull that up. Right. I think that's it for the main stuff that I wanted to cover. I'm happy to take questions if you guys have them.
Can you go over what UID means again?
So it's just a user ID, basically, right? I don't want to call it ID because when I save a user to my database, they're going to get a UID that auto increments from SQLite, right? So the UID is something that I'm getting back about that user, and I'm storing it as a separate column on my table. The idea is that, like, I want users to be able to sign up with GitHub, but I don't want them to be treated as new users every single time that they do that. I don't want to create a bunch of duplicate users, right? So then if I go back to that method I built, right, my custom class constructor, right? So I'm saying, find me the user who has GitHub as a provider and has a UID that matches the one from this response, right? If I find them, like, just return the first one that matches that, right? If I don't find them, make the user, right? So it's a way of checking to make sure, like, is this a user who has authenticated with GitHub using my application previously?
Okay. Got it. And what would you feel like the point of authentication in Rails then is Is it just solely to set up like the third party?
No. So the general idea of authentication, right? There's two steps to it. Identification. So the user is saying, or like they're giving evidence that they're a particular person, right? They're giving you a username and a password, or an email and a password, right? Authorization is confirming that they are who they said they are, right? So that's what we're looking at here. We're just looking at two different ways. We have kind of like we have a simple workflow. Like if we get out of here, we can just kind of sign up with my application, but we also have this third-party login so that GitHub can do the work of storing my password securely, right? And I'm kind of putting that responsibility off on them, right? It also is convenient for users because like GitHub, they give you like a token so that they, like if I sign out right now, let me get out of here, right? It's kind of a nicer experience for users because they can be lazy. Like I can log out and then I don't think I set this for, okay, I can, cool. I can sign in with GitHub. It's gonna hit my pry again. But like as a user, I didn't have to do anything else, right? Because for some amount of time, it's going to remember my credentials, because I think there's a token that you get and it expires after some period of time. But for some window, like I don't have to do anything else if I'm logging in with GitHub again. Cool.
Got it. And lastly, you said, you were like, I'm going to flag this, and then you set up like a attribute or something. When you said I'm going to like a flag this, do you mean like add like an attribute or add like a method?
I don't actually remember saying that. I'm
Okay.
sure that I did say that, but
Okay, I was just wondering what that meant.
it might have been when I was thinking about the controllers, right? Making sure to register them.
Yeah.
I was probably just trying to draw attention to something I was saying. Cool. What else can we do? I guess I'll share with you guys a few different options while I have it here. So I shared those links already. This is kind of the general devise documentation. There's like a whole wiki that has like a bunch of how-to articles if you wanted to customize further or if something went wrong. What else do we have? We talked a little bit about initializers. Again, an initializer is just letting you set some config stuff. This we looked at already, right? Talk about configuring views and customizing them. Same thing with your controllers. If you wanted to like customize your routes, so like by default, the way that we have this built out, if we look here, it has all of, okay, yeah, cool. Right, so it has these routes scoped under users. If you didn't want that, like if you wanted to build your own custom like methods and helpers, you totally could do that with Devise. You would just go to your routes, and then the syntax you would use is you would say, where was it at? You would say Devise scope, and then you give it a block. So what could we do? So like, let's say I don't want like user slash sign up. I want something like slash sign up without that prepended to it. I could do something like get sign up to, now this is my Devise controller. So I could say Devise, oh no. That was my my second screen doing a weird thing. I guess it decided it doesn't want to work correctly anymore. But you could say something like go over to Devise for my session. No, it's the registrations controller. Registrations, new, and then you could customize that helper. So you could say something like as sign up, and it would give you a sign up path, right? So there are ways to customize your routes and things like that if that's something that you want to do. We're not going to do that here though. What else do I have? My screen is like doing a weird thing. There we go. Cool. What else? What else? I think that's it. Like again, you can find documentation on some of the helper methods if you'd like to use those. I'll link those as well when I link the recording, right? Last call for questions. Anything else? All right, cool. If you guys are all good, you guys have a great night, and hit me up if you do have any questions.
Thank
Right.
you.
You.
Yeah, you're welcome. Bye, everybody. I can't actually leave the call. I'm having, it's been an adventure in study groups. All right, bye, everybody.
Bye.